Historically, everyone in our communities was connected, more like family than just neighbors. If a child did something wrong, the whole family would intervene. If someone fell ill, the community rallied around them. Today, we are fragmented, which allows negative external forces, what some call the six ethereal forces, to dominate us. By synchronizing our tones, chanting together on the same frequency, we literally change the vibrational frequency of the planet. When enough of us emit this unified energy, we can begin to dispel these adverse forces that perpetuate societal ills, increasing chaos, rampant crime, mental distress among young people, and so on. As we attune ourselves to this collective vibration, we re-establish balance, returning to the natural, feminine energy of Anan, the energy the earth itself radiates. This idea of a shifting planetary energy is not new. For the past 12,000 years, regardless of religious affiliation, groups have fought over the same geographic lands, not because of the soil itself, but because of the vibrational energy present there. Think of Jerusalem. Christians, Muslims, and Jews waged war over that city not for its real estate, but for the subtle energy field that once pulsed there. That energy was originally centered in Nubian-dominated regions before outsiders displaced or slaughtered the local people to seize its power. Ancient texts, such as the Possession Change 2012, detail how every 12,000 years the Earth's energy shifts to a new location. Presently, this energy has moved from the Middle East to Africa, which is why we are witnessing uplifting developments among African Americans and Africans abroad. Because of this shift, people in the Middle East, once thriving due to this energy, are now in decline. Some might ask why Arabs once amassed so much wealth. It wasn't merely oil, it was the planetary energy that flowed through their lands. Whoever occupied that region benefited spiritually, physically, and materially. When Barack Hussein Obama took office, one of his goals was to diminish the undue influence of certain Islamic nations whose power derived from that energy. Prior to his presidency, George W. Bush had made some inroads, but Obama intensified the effort, effectively decapitating regimes in Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya, capturing Osama bin Laden, and facilitating the removal of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. Suddenly, the so-called invincibility of those Islamic states began to unravel. Today, women in some of those countries walk around in leggings and contemporary styles while still wearing traditional head coverings, an indication that the old strictures no longer hold the same power. When the old energy departed, it was inevitable that the influence of those systems would wane. Now that this potent energy resides in Africa, Africans and African Americans stand to benefit, if we position ourselves to receive it. Unfortunately, some adopt a bum's mentality, waiting idly for blessings to descend, as though expecting pie in the sky. Our teachers always stress that what we receive spiritually can fuel our material success only if we actively cultivate opportunities, launch businesses, build enterprises, pursue creative endeavors. In recent years, we've seen many of our entertainers and entrepreneurs rise exponentially precisely because they had struggled for so long. Once the shift happened, their ascent became easier. However, some individuals who have never known struggle suddenly find themselves lavishly spending on items they don't need, giant TVs, six-figure cars, multi-million-dollar mansions, and then wonder why they cannot sustain those lifestyles. Lacking the knowledge to manage wealth, they often end up financially destitute. We see tragic stories of athletes and entertainers who earn millions but end their careers bankrupt because they have never learned fiscal responsibility. In America today, when blacks speak up about injustice, many accuse us of playing the race card or crying white privilege, but that is hypocritical when you consider the centuries of slavery, segregation, economic exploitation, and medical abuse we have endured. When you continually beat someone down, through forced labor, Jim Crow laws, mass incarceration, redlining, medical experimentation, how can you expect them not to seek justice using race or class as a framework? America claims to fear socialism and communism, yet we borrow trillions from communist China, which is proof that capitalism has failed most people. In the United States, medical billing is one of the largest industries. Hospitals and pharmaceutical companies profit from people's sickness. With or without Obamacare, medical expenses can destroy a family's finances. A routine dental checkup costs hundreds of dollars. If a dentist finds a cavity, a simple filling runs into the thousands. Kidney dialysis can cost tens of thousands. Prescription drugs can be hundreds per month. Under Obamacare, premium subsidies are supposed to offset these costs for low-income families, but insurers and pharmaceutical companies still pad their profits by overbilling. By contrast, Obama's reforms attempted to cut out the middlemen, ensuring that taxpayers, rather than individuals without means, would cover routine health care. Republicans resisted these reforms, not because they cared about patients, but because big pharma and insurance conglomerates funded their campaigns. Their priority was always profit over people's well-being. In America, The real wealth is not in hospitals, where a sick patient eventually dies and costs the system money, but in pharmacies that keep people chronically ill. Diabetes, hypertension, kidney disease, these conditions often result from our consumption of processed sugars, sodas, and artificial chemicals. A young person might not feel the effects of sugar now, but in middle age, their pancreas and kidneys fail. At that point, they require ongoing medication, dialysis, and possibly transplant, ensuring a steady revenue stream for pharmaceutical and medical equipment companies. Meanwhile, alternative approaches, diet change, herbal remedies, clean water, are sidelined because they threaten the profit margins of the conventional medical industry. Even birth control pills, which many consider benign, can damage the liver over time. Likewise, energy drinks mixed with hard liquor, like Monster and vodka, are becoming notorious for liver toxicity. These substances suppress or hijack our body's natural detoxification processes, leaving us vulnerable to chronic disease. Yet the corporations that produce them pour millions into advertising and political donations, ensuring these products remain on the market. To summarize, our master teacher Dr. York has dedicated his life to recovering and sharing ancient African knowledge that has been systematically stolen, suppressed, and misrepresented for centuries. Through his books and oral teachings, he exposes the interconnectedness of all major religions, secret societies, and even modern geopolitical conflicts. By reconnecting to our collective tone, the vibrational frequency our bodies naturally emit, we can restore the planet's energy to its rightful stewards and dismantle the negative forces that keep us divided. But this spiritual empowerment must be accompanied by practical action, building businesses, educating ourselves on fiscal responsibility, promoting natural health, and exposing the corrupt systems that profit from our disunity and illness. Only then can we fully benefit from the shifting energies now centered in Africa and re-establish balance in our communities, our nations, and the world. People, after having large amounts of blood drawn, often feel weak, and this is by design. At birth, many Caucasians receive blood transfusions, sometimes as much as 2 quarts, so that hospitals can test and store the excess for future use. Hemophiliacs, including albinos, require even more transfused plasma because their blood does not clot properly. They often receive a full quart of blood at birth and rely on periodic re-ups to maintain their health. Meanwhile, popular television shows like CSI portray crime labs detecting minute blood smudges to identify suspects, but in reality hospitals routinely draw 6 volts of blood just to run tests, then discard or repurpose the remainder. That leftover blood, along with body parts and flesh unsuitable for transplant, goes into hospital incinerators or grinding machines that pulp human remains, a fact few patients are ever informed about. This commodification of human blood and body parts echoes the legacy of slavery in America. Contrary to popular cinematic depictions of enslaved Africans doing the entire backbreaking labor on plantations, most of the hardest fieldwork was performed by indentured Irish immigrants. Enslaved Africans were valued more for their role as a food supply, sustaining European settlers. Even today, about 90% of white men who date black women are drawn to women wearing natural hairstyles, braids, dreadlocks, or short cuts, because they believe that natural hair signifies a healthier, better blood from a more conscious diet. Many of these women are vegetarians and highly attentive to hygiene, whereas Caucasian men suspect that women with processed hairstyles like straight weaves consume unhealthy foods, fast food, pork, fried chicken, which they equate with tainted blood. Thus, these men seek out pure blood in black women because they want the vitality that supposedly comes from a natural, plant-based diet. In this context, myths about vampires and the notion of drinking blood take on a metaphorical dimension. They represent an envy of this perceived health and strength. Some conspiracy theories even suggest that elements of these myths were deliberately crafted to obscure the truth about who benefits from our blood and how it is used. Slavery itself, some argue, was not primarily about cotton production, though that was certainly part of it, but about controlling and exploiting human bodies and their biological resources. Abraham Lincoln's reference to vampire slayer is sometimes invoked to critique the way white society has historically fed off black blood, both literally and figuratively. Shifting from the topic of blood to the realm of ancient astronomy, there is a site known as the Nefta Playa located between what is now Sudan and Egypt. Often hailed as the oldest astrological observatory on Earth, predating the pyramids, its circular megalithic structure aligns with 4 seasons and marks the solstices. A central standing stone serves as the observer's point, while surrounding stones indicate the horizon at sunrise for various significant stars. Remarkably, the distances from the central stone to each peripheral stone correspond almost precisely to the light-year distances of those stars from Earth. Modern technology, developed around 2008 or 2009, has confirmed the astonishing precision with which ancient builders could calculate these astronomical measurements. Efforts to document and publicize this knowledge continue, but some stones have been toppled or removed, presumably to suppress awareness that sub-Saharan Africa, particularly the region often called Sudan and the Nile Valley, was home to highly advanced civilizations. These were the Nagaru, the so-called Ancient Ones, who may have been tutored by extraterrestrial overseers and whose astrological expertise eclipsed even the later dynastic Egyptians. Similar megalithic sites exist elsewhere in Africa, in Ethiopia, and around the world, including Stonehenge in Europe and various circular monuments across the Americas. The Olmec civilization in what is now Mexico also constructed pyramids and temples, drawing on knowledge passed down, some say from the Anunnaki or other ancient peoples through culturally transmitted wisdom, to erect monumental architecture. These sites often served as places of ritual sacrifice. In Mesoamerica, both the Maya and the Zapotec practiced blood offerings to deities they revered, entities which many scholars today interpret as representations of extraterrestrial beings. The food for the gods doctrine posits that the spilled blood nourished these celestial patrons. Temple structures rose up where these rituals took place, reflecting a shared architectural language across disparate cultures influenced by similar cosmological frameworks. Returning to the subject of modern religious and cultural holidays, Christmas is commonly perceived as a purely Christian celebration of Christ's birth, yet its true origins lie in ancient Sumer and Babylon. Early Christians appropriated the midwinter festival, once dedicated to the birth of Sargon or Nimrod, and fused it with theological narratives about Jesus. The symbol of the evergreen pine tree, for instance, originates from legends about Nimrod's tomb. Santa Claus, complete with his cold coal that symbolizes fire and warmth, is a direct parallel to Jesus as a divine gift giver. Children are taught to be good for goodness sake, just as believers are urged to lead righteous lives. Saints and biblical figures are essentially repackaged deities from Mesopotamian pantheons. When Israelite exiles returned from Babylon, they brought back stories and practices that eventually evolved into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Today's Christmas traditions, gift-giving, caroling, the Christmas tree, stem from these earlier pagan rituals, repurposed to fit Christian ideology. Likewise, Halloween, or Hallows Eve, derives from the Celtic festival of Samhain, which marked the new year for Druids and honored the Lord of the Dead. On Samhain, bonfires blazed, and both animal and human sacrifices were offered to appease the gods. The practice of trick-or-treat has its roots in these pagan customs. Beneath the modern veneer of costumes and candies lies a centuries-old tradition of rites intended to ensure fertility and ward off evil spirits. Yet when someone rejects these holidays, choosing to either ignore them or create alternative observances, they are branded a cult, as if maintaining cultural autonomy is inherently illicit. This inconsistency is evident in the way society encourages parents to let children gorge on sugar during Halloween, contributing to a rise in childhood diabetes and other health problems, while simultaneously ostracizing those who resist the dominant holiday narrative. The Gregorian calendar itself is a product of manipulation. Although it lists 12 months, January through December, the etymologies of months like October, November, and December reveal that they were originally the 8th, 9th, and 10th months, respectively. Julius Caesar's reforms added June and July, named after himself and his heir Augustus, pushing the original months 2 places later. A December, for example, should mean the 10th month in Latin, decem equals 10, yet it became the 12th month. This shift exemplifies how a calendar can encode hidden power structures. Every date, every holiday, becomes part of a system designed to obscure earlier truth and enforce conformity. Within this framework of concealed or distorted knowledge, scholars like Dr. Malachi Z. York have emerged, writing extensively to tease apart the web of lies embedded in modern culture. Over the past 30 years, York has authored and revised works such as The Fallacy of Christmas and The Fallacy of Easter, meticulously tracing the origins of these celebrations from A to Z. In The Fallacy of Christmas, York demonstrates that Christmas owes more to Nimrod and ancient Mesopotamian myths than to any uniquely Christian narrative. In The Fallacy of Easter, he deconstructs the Easter bunny myth, illustrating the absurdity inherent in claiming that a rabbit lays eggs, to show how the holiday merges the death and resurrection story of a supposed deity with pagan symbols of fertility and rebirth. York's methodology is uncompromising. He issues a challenge to critics: prove just one word in his extensive text to be false, and he will cease writing forever. Although detractors have attempted to refute his claims, such as Bilal Phillips's book The Answer in America, York responded with an exhaustive rebuttal called the Ansar Cult Rebuttal to the Slanderers, debunking every error, misquotation, and misspelling in Phillips's 186-page pamphlet with a 609-page countertext. When skeptics demanded evidence that York truly knew hidden historical facts, he predicted outcomes that only divine insight could yield. For instance, he described how one of the Lewis and Clark expedition members, someone named Meriwether Lewis, died under suspicious circumstances. They claimed he died of natural causes, but York asserted that an ally of York's family, referenced as Ben York, had shot him in the chest and head. When modern archaeologists unearthed Lewis's remains, they discovered bullets in his skull and chest exactly as York had described, demonstrating that York's knowledge transcended conventional academic inquiry. Critics who sought to discredit him instead validated his prophetic accuracy. Given this context, attempting to explain lies, such as the origins of Easter or Christmas, becomes a Herculean task. As York often says, "You cannot ask me to tell you the truth about a lie." Any attempt to rationalize Easter will inevitably be an exercise in explaining an essentially irrational holiday, one built upon the impossible concept of a rabbit laying eggs. No matter how one frames the discussion, the roots of Easter trace back to the pagan deity Ishtar or similar fertility gods, and the Easter egg motif is merely a repackaged symbol of fertility. York's book, The Fallacy of Easter, provides a line-by-line analysis of every element, from the date determination based on lunar cycles to the incorporation of spring solstice celebrations, revealing the holiday's entirely borrowed or fabricated components. Because Easter's foundation is so thoroughly steeped in pre-Christian paganism, any explanation will inevitably highlight the impossibility of reconciling the Christian narrative with the older rituals it supplanted. When questions turn to the pyramids of Mesoamerica, specifically those built by the Olmec civilization, they converge on the same theme of ancient knowledge transmitted through multiple cultures. The Olmecs, among the earliest complex societies in the Americas, constructed monumental pyramids, plazas, and ceremonial centers long before the height of Maya or Aztec civilization. According to tablet records interpreted by some researchers, these structures were not only architectural marvels but also spiritually charged sites where blood sacrifices were offered to extraterrestrial patrons, the gods of the heavens who, in exchange for human offerings, granted agricultural fertility, celestial knowledge, and technological insight. This food for the gods doctrine explains why temples like those at La Venta and San Lorenzo featured plazas designed to channel sacrificial blood, with deep respect for the idea that the spilled fluid nourished divine beings residing beyond the visible sky. Thus, from the rivers of blood drawn at birth to the pyramids built on sacrificial rites, and from the holiday calendar manipulated by emperors to the modern corporate repackaging of ancient festivals, a single thread runs through human history. Secret knowledge is hoarded by those in power, while myths and lies are propagated to keep the masses docile and dependent. Every date on the calendar, every holiday we celebrate, and every monument we marvel at is imbued with layers of meaning, some sacred, some profane, but almost all designed to reinforce a particular social order. Cracking these codes, as Dr. York and other truth seekers attempt, means dismantling a carefully constructed edifice of deception, revealing a history far richer, more interconnected, and far less Eurocentric than the one we have been taught to accept. According to the teachings we follow, the Anunnaki, or Elohim in Hebrew scripture, are a race of extraterrestrial beings who originally came to Earth from a distant star system, Anu, when all the continents were still joined. These same beings also traveled to the Americas, where they supervised local populations in Central and South America. One of their emissaries was a being known as Alu, also called Alalu. Alu arrived in Central and South America and became the primary deity or overseer for the indigenous peoples there. When local rulers or priests offered blood sacrifices, they did so to Alu, an Anunnaki entity, rather than to any purely terrestrial spirit. Some of those people, in particular, priests and select initiated individuals, were even taken up to Mars by Alu. According to the sacred tablets preserved in our tradition, this transport occurred before the intervening centuries on Earth. In fact, after Alu departed to Mars, enough people followed him that Mars became partially colonized by human-derived life. Various experiments were conducted there to create subservient worker beings, called Lulu Amalu, bred to extract the gold that the Anunnaki needed to return to their own dying planet. Similarly, when Alu left Earth for Mars, several other hominid varieties, such as the proto-Homo species designated Hamu or New Hamed, were transported from Mars to Earth to serve in labor projects. Fast forward to 2012, our master teacher taught that a contingent of Martian-based Anunnaki and those Earthlings taken to Mars by Alu finally returned. Contemporary news outlets even reported finding lost groups of people living beneath South American caves, who were then encountered and, unfortunately, sometimes killed by locals wielding archaic weapons. According to our master teacher's prophecy, this was tangible evidence that the Martian-stationed Anunnaki consorted once more with human populations on Earth. Turning to the pyramids themselves, although we see both step pyramid designs, like those at Chichen Itza or Tikal, and smooth-sided designs, more reminiscent of Giza, in the Americas, this does not indicate two entirely separate origins. Rather, It reflects the same foundational technology, shared by all Anunnaki overseers, applied in different architectural styles. Think of automobile manufacturing as an analogy. A Toyota, a Honda, and a Nissan all share internal combustion engine technology, but they look and perform differently on the road. Likewise, the Anunnaki passed down a core engineering blueprint for pyramid construction, which local chiefs and architects then adapted according to regional customs, available stone, and ritual requirements. For those who wish to study this subject in greater depth, our master teacher wrote a book titled The Science of the Pyramids, Revised Edition, which explores these technological connections in detail. There is also his treatment of ancient Egypt, and the pharaohs, which hints at how Mesopotamian Anunnaki, the very same gods whom the Bible calls Elohim, later became de facto rulers or divine patrons of the pharaohs. In that context, the famous line in Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," actually refers to a council of Anunnaki deciding to genetically engineer hominids on Earth. The pluralis in Hebrew, Elohim, is directly derived from Anunnaki, meaning those who descended from Anu, the highest. From there, one emissary named Elu branched off to the Americas, and another group remained focused on Mesopotamia and Egypt. Both factions shared technical knowledge, ritual practices, and genetic manipulation techniques, hence the common pyramidal core but diverging local styles. Over the past several decades, we have conducted question and answer classes precisely so that every subject, whether above or below the sun, can be openly examined. We do not charge for attendance, nor do we pass around a collection plate. Instead, our master teacher insists that everyone bring paper and pen to every session. Why? Because the most receptive word in English is believe, and belief literally contains the word lie. If you accept something you do not know, you are still in ignorance. Thus, our teacher's motto has always been, "Don't believe me, check it out." If you simply nod your head and say, "Oh, I trust you," it's no better than any other form of dogma. Instead, you must write the questions down, note the chapter and verse or tablet references, then verify them for yourself in the primary texts and archaeological records. For example, if someone claims, Jesus was the only Son of God, our teacher will remind us, okay, where in the Bible does it say that explicitly? Let's write that down and check every ancient manuscript, every reputable translation, even cross-references in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you study carefully, you discover that the Hebrew word bar means son of, so whenever a New Testament passage refers to bar Jesus, it literally means son of Jesus, implying that Jesus himself had a child. Likewise, at the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine, no bride or groom is named in the text. Instead, the only people mentioned by name are Jesus and his mother, Mary. Why would Mary, his mother, approach Jesus to complain about the wine running out? If it had been her son's wedding, one would expect her to speak to the bridegroom. The only way this makes sense, when you apply sound reasoning, or reasoning right, as our tradition calls it, is that the bride at Cana was Mary of Magdala, Jesus' wife. Therefore, Jesus must have had a wife and later a son, the bar Jesus figure mentioned in the text. These details, once you write them down and check them, completely upend conventional Christian interpretations, which are built on the assumption of celibacy and singular divinity. When debating these points with Christians, or anyone whose theology is taught as dogma, you cannot simply assert, "I believe this." You must present line by line, verse by verse reasoning. According to Matthew 5:17, Jesus said, "I did not come to destroy the law but to fulfill it." The very first commandment in Genesis 1:28 is be fruitful and multiply. If Jesus intended to follow Torah law, he would have to marry and have children to fulfill that injunction. Otherwise, he would be contradicting his own statement about not abolishing the law. At that point, your interlocutor cannot just reply, "Well, I wasn't there," because you're not asking for eyewitness testimony, you're asking for logical consistency. So the process becomes, 1. Write down the question or paradox, 2. Locate the original text, Bible, Quran, Torah, or Sumerian tablets, 3. Analyze it logically, and 4. Draw a conclusion based on evidence rather than on unexamined belief. If you rely solely on what preachers or pastors tell you, they can get away with almost any claim, because congregations rarely ask for precise translations, original language nuances, or cross-cultural comparisons. Our master teacher warns that this blind faith is precisely what imprisoned humanity for the last 6,000 years. He teaches that the devil, which in ancient Hebrew essentially means liar, has sown so many falsehoods, about God, about creation, about Jesus, about Moses, about everything, that unless we consciously brainwash ourselves with truth, we cannot return to our home among the Anunnaki, or to our rightful cosmic place. In other words, brainwashing, in his terminology, simply means washing away impurities, removing lies from our minds so we can reconnect with genuine knowledge. To succeed in this process, our teacher encourages us always to come prepared with written questions. He makes it clear that we are not to turn our Q&A classes into religious services where we just recite unexamined dogma. Rather, they are scientific, informational sessions in which every claim must be verified. If a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Jehovah's Witness, a Hebrew Israelite, and a devil worshipper are all asked who is God, each will answer differently, and they will all claim, because I believe it. But our master teacher demands empirical proof, historical context, cross-textual comparison, and consistent reasoning. That's why he says, don't believe me, check it out. When you debate someone who asks, how do I know you're telling the truth? You explain, start by reading the Sumerian king list and the Enuma Elish tablets. Compare them with Genesis 1 through 5. Notice the word Elohim in Hebrew is analogous to Anunnaki, meaning those who came down from Anu. Now look at the mitochondrial DNA research in 18+1 of the 18+ chromosomes, our master teacher's reference to advanced genetic labs, showing how humans were manipulated by alien DNA. Match that against Egyptian pyramid inscriptions that name the same Anunnaki deities. When those data points align, on paper, line by line, inscription by inscription, you see a coherent narrative that cannot be dismissed merely by saying, I wasn't there. Of course, not everyone catches these connections immediately. That is why our master teacher teaches with extraordinary patience. He will answer the same question over and over, from different angles, just as Moses needed patience when dealing with the Israelites. Moses himself was called a god, Exodus 7:1, but when he lacked patience, he lost his ability to walk intimately with Melchizedek, or, in some accounts, Mel's a reference to Mercury or the messenger god, all because he became frustrated with ignorant questioning. By contrast, our teacher shows answers 70 times 7, returning to the same topics repeatedly until every student can see the logic. He has, as he says, 76 trillion years of information to share, meaning, countless cycles of cosmic history, genetic data, linguistic keys, and archaeological evidence. Still, he never grows weary of explanation. If someone didn't see the implication that Bar Jesus means son of Jesus, he will go through the Hebrew grammar, the Greek translation, the Judaic burial practices, and even the wedding at Cana scenario, until the student finally says, oh, that makes sense now. Our master teacher wants you to grow in right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding, sound right reasoning, what we call netaru, not in blind faith. So here is a summary of the key points you need to take away. He Anunnaki, or Elohim, are extraterrestrial beings from Anu. One emissary, Alu, came to South and Central America and was worshipped as a deity. Local priesthoods offered blood sacrifices to Alu, believing they were communing with him. Technologically, both step and smooth-sided pyramids derive from a single Anunnaki engineering blueprint. Regional variation produced different architectural styles. Alu and select human initiates were transported to Mars. There they genetically engineered subservient worker beings, Lulu Amalu, to mine gold. Other hominid specimens were brought from Mars to Earth. In 2012, a group of these Martian colonists returned to Earth. As predicted, evidence was reported of ancient people living underground in South America. The Science of the Pyramids Revised explains construction technology, telepathic communication towers, for example, the Babel Tower, and how the Anunnaki controlled frequency fields to influence human consciousness. Ancient Egypt and the Pharaohs details how Mesopotamian Anunnaki later became clients or patrons of Egyptian rulers. Do not rely on anyone's word alone. Always write down the question, note the text reference, and verify it yourself. Remember Baba's motto, don't believe me, check it out. To understand where we begin, consider that in ancient times our ancestors came from the stars to seed this planet. In the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah, these beings are referred to as Malak or angelic beings. Genesis 6, the sons of God came down and saw the daughters of men, raises the timeless question, where did they come from? Many simply say heaven, but if heaven lies beyond the furthest star, the sun itself being 93 million miles away, then were these beings residing on another planet? Turning to Greek and Roman mythology, deities like Zeus and Jupiter are described as dwelling on Olympus, high in the clouds. In Revelation 21-22, we read of a new heaven and a new earth coming down, and specifically of a crystal city descending to earth. These stories, preserved in sacred texts, hint at cosmic origins and celestial visitors. Our own sacred walls in Egypt depict how life evolved from the waters. The science of evolution teaches that we moved from aquatic life to land-dwelling creatures, from protozoa to amphibians to more complex beings. In the hieroglyphs and wall carvings of ancient Egypt, there are representations of the Ogdod or Rash Anat, also called the Keminu, meaning 8, which refer to the 4 pairs of primordial beings, male and female serpents, frogs, and reptilians, that emerged from the waters. This metaphor is echoed in human embryonic development. Before birth, we reside in amniotic fluid for 9 months, breathing not air but nourishing fluids until we emerge into the world, take our first breath of air, and begin life as land creatures. From tadpole to frog, from embryo to person, the process of creation is unfolding even today. Because our original ancestors were so attuned to nature, they learned to adapt to their environment over countless generations. Just as we learned to cook by trial and error, burning, cutting ourselves, making mistakes, early humans had to discover, again and again, what to do and what not to do. Over time, this intimate knowledge of nature's laws became a mastery. They learned not to pet lions, not to anger elephants, not to swim in crocodile-infested rivers. They learned how to store food for times of famine, how to anticipate droughts and floods. Each temptation tested their survival, and each mistake could cost a life. Through such trials, they developed a doctrine of do's and don'ts that preserved the community. Eventually, this wisdom was recorded on walls and in books. In Egypt, the laws and ethical precepts were inscribed on temple walls, what later Europeans called the Egyptian Book of the Dead but which the Egyptians themselves called Coming Forth by Day. Inside those texts appears the declaration of innocence before the tribunal of Osiris. I have not done wrong. I have not robbed. I have not slain people. I have not reduced measures. I have not stolen property. I have not committed grain robbery. I have not disassembled. I have not disclosed secrets. I have not fornicated with fornicators. I have not caused anyone to weep. I have not brought a lawsuit. I have not had intercourse with a married woman, and so on. These statements are strikingly similar to the 10 Commandments and the 613 laws of the Torah, yet they predate them all. The Egyptians wrote on papyrus, paper, derived from pap, the Egyptian word for the material, but before papyrus, the laws were on stone walls. When Moshe, received the 10 Commandments, he received them in stone, symbolic, because Hebrew slaves did not write on stone. Moses himself had grown up in Pharaoh's household, speaking Egyptian, not Hebrew, which is why Exodus says he had a speech impediment. In fact, he was simply not fluent in Hebrew. Similarly, Muhammad is described as illiterate, meaning he did not read and write in Arabic. Ignorant in its root sense simply means not knowing, so these prophets demonstrated divine power by conveying revelation despite linguistic limitations. Over centuries, the original Egyptian doctrines were appropriated. Hebrews took laws and repackaged them as divine commandments in the Torah. Later, Christians and Muslims borrowed from both. NWPU's role is to restore the natural, universal knowledge of the cosmos and the planet, not to impose fear of damnation or threats of eternal punishment. Religious systems often cast these ancient principles into dogma. If you do not follow this, you will burn in hell or you will be stoned to death. In truth, these laws were about living in harmony with nature, not enforcing moral terror. Even simple customs, like clothing, derive from environment. In a desert, one wears loose robes and turbans to shield against sandstorms. It would be unreasonable to force someone in Antarctica to wear such attire. Yet when empires expand, conquering new lands, they often attempt to impose their own customs, ignoring local conditions. History is replete with examples of conquerors supplanting indigenous practices. When Arabs and Persians entered Africa, they overlaid Islamic culture on native traditions. When Europeans colonized the Americas, they forced Christianity on the indigenous peoples. In each case, cultural practices were molded to fit the conqueror's worldview, rather than adapting to local reality. This manipulation is also evident in place names. Prior to colonization, what we now call Africa was known by various indigenous names: Kemet, Nubia, Kush, reflecting its ancient civilizations. The name Africa comes from Latin Africa, a term used by the Romans, and borrowed from Arabic Afriqiya, meaning land of the Afri, who lived near Carthage, and only later became the continent's official name. Scipio Africanus, the Roman general, received the cognomen Africanus after his victories in North Africa. The land was not originally called after him, rather, his title derived from the region he conquered. Hidden Colors and similar modern documentaries sometimes perpetuate confusion about these origins, but historical records show that Africa as a geographic term emerged through Roman and Arabic usage, not from a single conqueror naming the entire continent. In our original tongue, people called themselves children of the sun, the SABAT-U, and the land was Tamari, the land of the waters and the sun, which signified not just the continent, but the entire planet. The Egyptians understood that the planet itself was a living organism, part of a cosmic order, and their language reflected that holistic worldview. As our ancestors spread out, they developed regionally adapted cultures, what we call nature fitting to environment, and inscribed those lessons on walls, in temples, and in sacred texts. we stress that each individual is a microcosm of the universe, as above, so below. Every atom in your body reflects the structure of the galaxies overhead, each cell mirrors the cosmic pattern. You are the center of your own universe, just as all universes exist together within the omniverse. By understanding this principle, you realize that the laws governing stars also govern you. Cosmic order translates into ethical conduct. Respect for nature, for your body, for your community, these are universal truths, not religious fictions. Our teacher instructs across various schools of thought: Muslims, Christians, Jews, Masons, Sufis, Shriners, even Native American traditions, because all of these systems originally drew from the same Egyptian source. Over millennia, bits and pieces were borrowed, altered, and rebranded. Prayer postures, ritual cleansings, moral precepts, they all appear on the walls of Egyptian temples and tombs. We are in the process of reclaiming that knowledge, bit by bit, to restore it to its rightful context. We take back the Book of the Dead, which we call Coming Forth by Day, the Black Book, and all the sacred texts that our ancestors inscribed. We restore to you the original passages, the entire corpus of Egyptian cosmic doctrine, so that you may understand once again how it began, and how, in the end, it shall return. All things physical, every object, every particle, are governed by the same laws. When we look around at the material world, we see forms made of energy slowed down into what we call physical matter. In that sense, whether you're talking about the book in your hands or the cells in your body, you're really dealing with conglomerations of vibrating energy. But if physicality begins where matter coalesces, we must ask, where does the physical truly begin, and where, then, does the spiritual start? To answer that, we start by defining physical in terms of the smallest unit of material. Under classical understanding, the tiniest particle making up everything was once thought to be the atom, the hydrogen atom, specifically. Today we know that even hydrogen is composed of smaller particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, each in turn built from quarks and gluons. So you could say that physicality begins at the hydrogen atom, because once energy congregates into hydrogen, matter as we perceive it on this plane comes into being. Yet each subatomic component is itself a density of energy, the proton, the electron, the quark, all vibrating according to natural laws. In other words, even physical objects remain fundamentally energy, only slowed enough to become detectable. If physical begins at the hydrogen atom, then spiritual must lie on the other side of that threshold. Beyond the smallest particle of material, we enter the pure realm of energy that is not coalesced into matter. On that side lies what we call the spirit realm. In this framework, when the body returns to dust, or when any form dissolves, what persists is that original, unconfined energy. Yet while energy underlies both physical and spiritual realms, it takes on different qualities or natures at each level. Every particle within the physical world, proton, electron, quark, has its own nature, its own behavior within the whole of nature. For example, a proton's positive charge and an electron's negative charge each manifest distinct patterns of motion and interaction. Those internal natures are part of the broader, unified nature of the universe. Thus, when someone speaks of the nature of nature, they aren't simply equating microcosm, the tiny particles, with macrocosm, the vast universe. Rather, they mean that each level, each particle, each system, operates by its own rules, yet still participates in the larger, unified laws that govern everything. So it would be incorrect to say nature of nature just means microcosm and macrocosm are identical. Instead, it means that every component has its own behavior inside the greater whole. When we explore the spiritual, our master teacher taught that our very definition of spiritual must evolve. We first clarify, what is spiritual, and what does that word mean to us personally? For some, to say I am spiritual simply means I am not this body. It means recognizing that the physical human form is merely energy made dense, and that when the flesh falls away, the true essence of the self, pure energy, continues. In this sense, spiritual isn't about ghost stories or mysticism, it is about acknowledging that we are, at our core, energy beyond material form. Once we see physical as the level where energy condenses into hydrogen atoms and beyond, then spiritual becomes the realm where energy exists unbound by matter. That gives us a workable definition. The spiritual begins where the smallest physical particles end. From hydrogen downward into subatomic realms is still physical, though made up of vibrating energy. Past that point, we enter the spiritual. That spiritual energy is not fragmented into protons and electrons, it is the unified energy field that first existed before any material cosmos formed. Knowing this, we also have to consider how to take in knowledge. Our master teacher emphasized that learning is driven by inquiry. When you ask a question, that question determines the direction of your quest. If you want to know about how tone, sound, DNA, molecular vibrations and frequencies interrelate, then your starting point might be whatever text or fact number addresses that topic. There's no rule that you must begin with book 1. Unlike a chronological novel, these teachings are laid out so that whatever you're ready to learn will present itself according to your questions. If you gravitate toward fact number 18, discussions of vibrational frequencies, then start there. Your universe of study unfolds from that intersection of your current understanding and the question that stirs you. Over time, as you read more and revisit other texts, you'll see how seemingly disparate chapters connect, weaving together the full tapestry of knowledge. But knowledge is one thing, practical application is another. If the spiritual is energy beyond physical form, and if every component of nature, from quark to cosmos, has its own nature, then we have to understand the nature of other beings around us to live wisely. Consider the metaphor of snakes. Not all snakes are poisonous, but all snakes are, by nature, snakes. Knowing this, you wouldn't blindly stick your hand into a bag of snakes, even if some might be harmless, because you understand that the nature of the snake can be dangerous. In the same way, when you encounter different kinds of people or different energy patterns, you must first learn their nature to discern how to relate to them without putting yourself at risk. That brings us to the question of how genetics and vibration influence a being's nature. Our master teacher discussed inclination, how DNA and genetics predispose different beings to receive certain kinds of energy or messages. Because each genetic lineage vibrates at a certain frequency, what we call etheric levels, some beings are more inclined toward particular spiritual forces. Understanding that inclination helps us make informed choices about who to trust, how to interact, and how to preserve our own spiritual integrity. It does not mean hating or fearing others, but rather recognizing that each person has an inherent nature that may or may not align with our own spiritual path. For instance, every being exists within what we call the nine ether. However, within that unity, there are differences. Some ethers align more closely with the pure light that leads energy on to higher realms, while others do not. A being vibrating at a higher etheric level can translate into a higher dimension without outside assistance. A being at a lower level cannot make that transition on its own. This difference in vibrational capacity is not a moral judgment but a factual description of nature and genetics. From this perspective, any person, regardless of race, can join our work if they are willing to learn, to see their own nature honestly, and to commit to transforming that nature by aligning with the pure light. We have had Caucasian members in our community because it is not about skin color but about inner resonance with that light. However, those who wish to advance spiritually must first recognize and overcome the inclinations within their own genetic makeup that hinder their ascension. In other words, they must bite down on a bullet, truly face who they are, including the historical and cultural conditioning they carry, before they can move forward. We don't hate people based on their appearance or lineage. We see white people, black people, and every other group as reflecting different aspects of nature. We love the truth and hate ignorance or deception. When we shine a bright light of truth on any being whose inclinations keep them spiritually blind, it has the power to stop them in their tracks, just as shining light on a snake might freeze it momentarily. In that moment, that being has a choice, to ask for guidance, to learn about their true nature, and to join the journey, or to recoil and remain chained to ignorance. History shows that many systems of knowledge have been distorted. Ancient wisdom taught that every race on this planet is descended from higher, otherworldly beings, yet over time, those facts were covered up or rewritten by others seeking to control the narrative. Entire textbooks once claimed that European peoples descended from apes, while black people came from reptiles. Later, they held to the theory that Europeans came from reptiles, Africans from apes. These claims were asserted as absolute truth, backed by violent enforcement rather than by genuine understanding. Those distortions remain uncorrected in many public schools and universities today. We do not hate because of such lies, we simply remain wary of anyone who continues to spread them without honestly re-examining the facts. Even within our own community, we must face the mixed-up nature passed down through eons of confusion, colonization, and forced assimilation. Black people have been so tangled up with the conditioning of others that we often cannot hear our own divine voice. We fear the unknown because we have been taught to see difference as threat, rather than as a facet of the universal design. Thus, our first task is to reclaim awareness of our own natures, to know that within us is lodged the divine. Once we recover that voice, we can recognize the divine potential in others, too, without letting fear or hatred sway us. It is true that any being who wishes to ascend must have within them at least some portion of the pure light that vibrates on higher ethers. For white people or people of other lineages whose genetic inclination is toward a lower ether, salvation can still be obtained, because no one is permanently barred from the light. A Caucasian, for instance, can join our path if he or she is willing to bite down on that bullet, to accept personal responsibility, to see their own complicity in historical and present-day wrongs, and to work consciously to realign their nature. This process is not exclusive to one race, rather, it is a journey for anyone ready to confront who they truly are, beyond ancestry or surface identity. That journey often begins with a simple question: where do I start? The master teacher's answer is always, start where you are. Do not worry about what you missed in the past. If you come to this knowledge 20 minutes from now, that is exactly when you were meant to arrive. Your path begins with the questions you have today. If you are drawn to explore molecular vibration, begin with those teachings. If you wish to understand the interplay of race, genetics, and spiritual destiny, start there. As you progress, you will discover how each part of the curriculum, a teaching about hydrogen, a lesson on quarks, a story from ancient Sumeria, interconnects and enriches your understanding of the whole. Ultimately, learning is not about checking off Book 1, Book 2, and so on in numerical order. It's about following the path laid by your deepest questions and curiosity. Our master teacher taught that we are on a long journey along a short path, meaning that, in a condensed period, we gather vast amounts of information from multiple sources. At first, these sources may seem disjointed. One day you're learning about etheric anatomy, the next you're in a discourse on modern geopolitics. But over time, you see how each thread weaves into the tapestry of truth, revealing the unified laws that govern both the physical and spiritual universes. In the end, whether you are grappling with the precise nature of subatomic particles or the complex history of race and genetics, remember that every being and everything has its own nature, but all of those natures operate under the same universal principles. By understanding those principles and recognizing that you, too, are energy beyond physical form, you position yourself to walk a conscious path toward true spiritual awakening.